How amazing. I reckon that question, that's really to do with the age of the Earth. I think it's a really good one. I mean, right off the cuff, it's just something interesting, isn't it? Could anybody just talk a bit about it? Because shouldn't it be something which we really, know a little bit about? Of course, a lot of people could say, like science, for instance, is always will let you know, well, we've used the scientific process and we've determined that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and then they'll tell you how old the universe is in relation to what this is and this sort of thing. And these are very deep extrapolations, of course, because in qualitative research, you have to be able to have a referential index or an observational reference point when you're making some comparator. And if you're not there beforehand to see what the ingredients went into a mix of something, how would you know that the ingredients didn't get put in a different way and something came in and changed the formula around? I mean, how would you know that, you see? Because you'd have to actually have an assumption that something existed beforehand. And this is a bit of a problem where people are where they've gone to date the Earth. But let's think about it a little bit, because you could think that it's the oceans really at the bottom is only about 85,000 years old. And, that's pretty much confirmed a lot by carbon-14 looking at all sludge bits of patterns and things like that from the bottom of these oceans and where the oldest bits are. And so, it makes sense when you start to think about things more this way, because you can find soft blood and tissue and soft tissue and things in T-Rex bone. And these are kinds of things which people might have not ever thought a bit about before. And now you can do those sorts of things, and you can see that there's no way that these dinosaurs and this sort of thing could have be so far away. But interestingly, if I just say, how many stars are in the universe, is going to put you into a trans-derivational search for information for sure. Like, it's just going to leave you in a trance. And if somebody just says, oh yeah, like, well, it's 4.5 billion years old, that's how old the Earth is, what are you going to do after that? It's like, would you just give up and think, well, what's it going to be for us just to know a tiny bit about the past? It's like, whoa. No, why not know the whole thing and not be so like, putting a lot of information out which could be not so quite right, of course. Because at 8,000, 498 BC, you've got an asteroid which comes in and buries itself into the Atlantic, and you've got things that goes on at 144,000 miles per hour, even huge, and you've got asteroids which get smashed just into the Atlantic, for instance, where the Cape Charles, Virginia is. And evidence, of course, shows where that did smash in. And it's a reason where dots or could be lined up more where you could see yourself where a false paradigm might have been. And then suddenly you could see that how, a sonar could be used. And that's revealing a landscape that sunk because of it in Atlantis, all around, some islands and things which is left there still. But right below on the landscape there, you can see gorgeous, beautiful landscape, just like was a dry land at one point. And you've got 70% of the ocean, which covers all over the globe at the moment, and most of that water wasn't there before. And a lot more water has sort of come along, and where did this come from? And we could talk just a bit about this maybe tonight, or in this program a little bit that you're listening to. But asteroid evidence, why shouldn't it be that anybody would actually consider those sorts of things? Because you've got really big, huge impacts that go on, and of course the Greenland one. And do you know about these things? Because the evidence of sort of some great, terrestrial. Calamity type of event, you've got at least 200 or more that have been looked at and seen, and they're massive, they're not minor. And when one of those goes off, what goes on for us? And what goes on where the Earth is? It really does boil it inside, and it takes a long time for that to stop boiling. and it could have been thousands of years ago, and it's still sort of really boiling a lot inside from that. And we're going to talk a bit about that boiling in a second. But when you don't think that there's anything really responsible, or for the Earth where it's definitely grown 12 times larger than it was, because when you fit all the continents together, they fit exactly perfect together. But a day in Saturn, of course, which the Earth used to belong to Saturn, and when Saturn came in between Jupiter, which Jupiter was only about 1.5, I think, astronomical units away from the Sun at the point, Saturn come in, and the Earth used to be part of Saturn complex, and it left it there in the same tilt as angle as it used to have. So we could talk a bit about that, because it's like on a different sort of an angle than what the Sun's plane is, but it's pretty much on a similar angle, just a bit more or less, with a bit of a slight not the same as it would have been where Saturn was. And so it got tracted into space where it was. And as Saturn came back out again, it pulled Jupiter back out with it. And then Jupiter comes out to be 5.3, I think, astronomical units, which is a unit of measurement. That's one of those is the measurement that the Earth is away from the Sun. So it's 5.3 of those astronomical units more, and it pulled the Jupiter out to where it is. And then Venus was one of the planets that also was let loose a bit during that period of time. Took a bit of a time, but it smacked into Jupiter, which you can see the hole where that is on Jupiter, and wandered around. And then you could talk a little bit about when it finally got into place, where Venus finally gets back into place. But before it does, of course, Mars has wandered around a bit as well, and it's come really, really close to the Earth, which perhaps is those things which we could talk a little bit about, perhaps, because Sedona and those sorts of things could easily be seen with a telescope back in the day where this was and went on, which is fairly not too long ago, actually, you see. Everything is really much more younger than most people think, and when you put it into terms like this, but we're going to talk what would be the reason why suddenly you could actually think about things, because you could really look at the Earth bottom and start to read everything a little bit more and put it all together a little bit. But a day on Saturn is 10.7 hours, of course, and it takes 29.4 Earth years for one year for Saturn to move around the Sun.
Oh, I heard of that.
And it takes 10,756 Earth days to make 1 year, sort of, on Saturn. And so the last time Saturn sort of really was close to the Earth is 2034, of course. And the dance between Neptune and Saturn always would go on. But I'm letting you know that there's such a massive difference, in fact, actually, in how close these planets can come toward us and how far out they ever move as well. And you've got sorts of things that's going on that sort of affects this and can make it vary quite a bit. And so it's not necessary that something in a moment of time could be in the same orbit, more or less, relative. But it's a 26.7 degree angle where the plane is in its orbit for Saturn in its relationship to the Sun's equatorial plane. And it's the same rate, more or less, as Neptune also, which is also a watery body like Earth, relative, and some of the moons and things that are there, like around Jupiter. But the Saturn rings, which you could see really as a tilt, is a product more of an ancient set of planets that was missing, and you can see sort of a ring that's left from what's going on there. But it's very similar to Earth's 23.5 degree tilt, in fact, and what the reason is that most everything is relative to the equatorial plane of the Sun, yet you've got just a couple of things that isn't, like the Earth, and the Earth's degree tilt, wobbles a bit, but it's around about 23.5 sort of on an angle, you see, so similar. And so could you not say that something was on an actual Saturn influence to ever cause what this is? But these are things which I've written a little bit about more, and somebody could go to, I'm not sure where that is, on Facebook or something, I don't know. But it's a shredded moon, where a chrysalysis is, which has occurred. I mean, could you say that that happened 160,000 years ago, just a short time ago? Really? Yes, it did. You see, we're talking about the rings of Saturn, and when this all sort of gets moons where things like get moved together more, and something is missing there quite a bit. But Saturn really is very similar in its manner of things. Of course, it's much a watery body though, but we've got characteristics and things which is interesting. And wouldn't you say that some of these things are because we actually belong to Saturn in a time gone by? But belonging to the Saturn constellation, which then eventually gets captured by the Sun and gets deposited where Saturn really, like we're talking about, comes in front of Jupiter in the past, and as it comes back out, it just leaves the Earth in the similar inclination that that was. Or people could talk a bit about the Comet of Doom, where Atlantis is the source, of course, and Atlantis slowly gets sunk, and then the first king of Atlantis, which King Jabba is, and Cleopatra are connected to, of course, and all the lands quite a bit that were Moor and Kush, and a lot of all us really solidly connected. All the nations of the earth was a minor majority. But the Comet of Doom in Atlantis, if you look at the seamount that's found rooted more on a large terrace sort of plateau, southeast of the Azores Plateau, under the water, and you can find coral, and it's gone to hell. It's like several hundred metres down. A coral can only grow to 20 to 30 metres, and then suddenly you can find coral that is way down there, even 1,000 metres or more. That's 3,000 feet, and so, or more than that. So you've got an old epic, 600 BC, of course, which talks about Atla, and it's certain it said that it really wasn't a dream, and not. And that these were people that used to not have anything to eat except plant, and they never ate anything that would, try to struggle and get away from you. And they were fairly fair-skinned, and boats and this sort of thing. And 66,000 years ago, of course, you've got the coast of Guinea off West Africa. You've got a similar type of event like Chicxulub Club. But is it actually millions of years old, or is it really only 66,000 years ago, you see? So we could talk just a bit about the actual age, because obviously radiometric dating is out and it's completely off. And how can you use that, basically? You could within a certain degree, but certainly not with rocks, and certainly not trying to date where the Earth is. But the Cretaceous Paleolithic extinction that went on, if we go back 12,900 years, it's really a short time, you're going to see a sort of what's called the Younger Dyer era happen, and it's sort of like a mini ice age, and it's like you've got a Younger Dyer era, and over the atmosphere of looking at what climate goes on, and then all of a sudden that gets broken, and it only lasts for a few thousand years or less, but after that, like 10,000 years ago, the property gets broken, of course, and this coincides with 10,000 years ago with Atlantis sort of being sunk, and that asteroid that we started to talk a bit about, and was it that not allowed ongoing, which you're seeing various things occur. The last asteroid, of course, is the Burckle crater, and that Burckle crater had, of course, a massive tsunami. We could talk a bit about the Burckle crater because that's in the southern Indian Ocean. And that wiped out all of North Africa because it pushed a big, huge a wall of water up there. And rather than going more north, it was all channeled by all the mountains, the crest mountains, which just channeled it all, funneled around, and just dropped it back onto the Sahara and the Mediterranean, and sucked all the water out of the Mediterranean when that happened, and then it rushed back in again, which we have a bit of a story about in the Puzzle Hall of Bones. But the Burckle crater caused a massive tsunami, and that wiped out the whole of North Africa, leaving it as it is today. That was like 4,800 years ago. And that also equates exactly with Noah's flood, of course. People talk a bit about that. But did the old equator really exist before 12,900 years ago, a little bit 2,000 years before this, when the younger, drier era got kicked off? Yes, it did. Matter of fact, the Chilean Plateau and the Aztec lines all show proof that the old equator really where that went. And there's other shows and things that we've done that actually talk a little bit about how even Giza was right on the old equator line. And if you know this, you can know that that was time zero. And now you can learn a lot of things. You could learn what degrees and angles and things were, and where lots of, you could find various things. And that's, interesting because you could learn how to find where things were. But, because it was all based on a central sort of cartography. But 12,800 years ago, really, you got a deep chill. And then suddenly all of a sudden 8 degrees colder in nature, and you've got 1,200 years after this, you've got the sea all snapping dramatically back out of all of this, and the data shows that ice, stalagmites and stalagmites sort of in caves, and then ice cores and things shows that there was a massive burn off during that period of time. Most all the trees that existed got burned, and that was like 12,500 years ago, basically. So a big spike there was, yes, you could see it, and it was 12,800 years ago relative that you've got this huge explosion that goes on above the Hudson, and it's like an atmospheric sort of explosion, and it tilts the Earth, and causes like trees to all get knocked down and all get flooded and things down the Mississippi, and this happens like a few times, you see, and it gets buried all down there, and you can see Sitka cypress sort of trees, all still in the mud, which are over 10,000 years old, down in Louisiana. But the Earth was always part of Saturn, and the Saturn rings really are much younger, of course, than the Earth, and that they formed really in the time of dinosaurs, and that was only more recent, not in millions of years, and it's symbiotically more arrived, so that sharks, for instance, are much older than trees, of course, and dinosaurs and sharks all have been here for a bit longer, and this sort of thing. But everything that's sort of really been said is totally incorrect, and there's nothing sort of joining anything together like as if there was a lizard and then all of a sudden you have humans or something, and that's just completely wrong. Darwinism is completely off. There is an involuted state but not an evoluted state. At some point we could talk a bit about that, but we could stick with a little bit of this sort of dating a tiny bit. But the Earth really didn't evolve more from a perpetual dawn, which it did. So you've got to look into this. In fact, there was some point which we definitely do know there was no seasons, and that was when we were connected to Saturn. But once we got connected where we were, we suddenly are on a different plane to the sun left there, and continuing to have a season, a little like we would if we were on Saturn where things are now. So if the Earth was really, back in the day, had a perpetual dawn, it really didn't have a day or a night, but it had more an ultraviolet sky. And so the light that came to us was a bit more dark. And so it's still to this day, the Saturn is called the dark sun. And the sun took more Earth as a form of satellite and kept it sort of with itself as Saturn sort of went back out, and it pulled Jupiter back out. And so basically, we came from in front of Jupiter, which Saturn did, and as it went back out, it pulled Jupiter back with it and left Earth, of course, 1 astronomical unit from the sun, and pulled Jupiter out to 5.3 astronomical units, and it deposited the Earth and left it sort of. And so the black sun really wasn't any more, and that's a story which Cloud and the Toltec talk about, as far as this being the fifth son that she and the elders had documented. I mean, they had writing, which was all on a string, and that a lot of us would think, oh, well, these people, they were pretty dumb. God help us, they had a hell of a lot more wisdom and knowledge they passed on than what most people could have on the internet or anything that they could find today. And so you're looking at a golden age which we're moving into, and the beginning of some strange attractor which causes us to, or be drawn more to change. But Saturn really formed more in this primordial sort of nebula, which sort of forms the Sun and planetary systems, and Uranus and Venus sort of both rotate sort of in opposite directions to the regular spin, and it explains actually what happened where both of those planets get knocked around so that they're actually spinning in the opposite direction, that which everything else is spinning from west to east, but that spins from east to west. And you've got celestial sort of bodies, which is Venus and Uranus, which really experiencing very large collisions, which caused the spin, and now in the opposite direction, of course. But a present condition really is arrived at here where the Sun and the same is of the past, as we pass through various bits of space, but never the same quite proper, as we're moving around Alcyon, and it takes like near 26,000 years to sort of do one evolution. But Jupiter sort of formed more in a 3.5 AU area, and then went inward to 1.5 AU, and then reversed course more during the time where it gets captured by Saturn and pulled back out. Saturn's a very, very, very positive body. It pulls Jupiter out, and it crosses over the asteroid belt twice, and it scatters them so unbelievable inward and outward. And then, of course, August of 2003, you could imagine that you're looking at how close everything is, and you've got only 3.48 million miles away. You see, you've got Saturn, and maybe only in 70,000 years ago, Venus got more an atmosphere blown off. And so things are really could be put more in terms of an age and time frame, a little more, that gives people a greater capacity to actually really truthfully sort of get an idea of how Venus was ejected and pushed out and away from Jupiter at around 1500 BC. You see a periodic passage which is causing havoc noted, which Mars goes on, whereas this goes on as well, like we talked about in this story. These things are reported and existing in all the literature on written places and far away, all pointing to something that could be obvious that something happened. But Venus was really deposited more inside of Jupiter, and by Saturn and Jupiter ejecting Saturn, it gets everything pulled out and leaves Earth where it exists now, in the inclination that it has, and Earth's orbit, of course, in an axial inclination. And around 800 to 700 BC, of course, you really got stories of and the Sedona complex being set up, which is only a really short time ago, of course, where Mars was so close to Earth in its wanderedness during that time frame that Venus was trying to get into order a little bit, you see. But if you don't trust the story where the Bible is, for instance, how could anybody go on to talk about the salvatedness of all things either, where a story could be just so off maybe, or closer to most story, which is in the science, it's really off. But a J.C. Quanta, which is really how did the Earth grow? And you've got a J.C. Quanta of water as an equilibrium. And it's a J.C. Quanta, for instance, has got a lot of anomalies, where blood, for instance, can only be at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit to be able to actually hold on to its potassium. Otherwise, it actually starts to ever lose its potassium. And that activity really requires some sort of change in temperature as a cell membrane. And a J.C. Quantum really critically manages things where such is like this. It's sort of really something which causes liquid as a set colloid to have sort of 5 phases, like a solid, a gel, a liquid, a gas, and a magneton ether. And these are sort of states of a colloid. And so below hydrogen, you've got ions, of course. And so hydrogen is the really smallest element, of course, as JC Quanta is going to infinity. But in equilibrium or of magneton exchange really is a management where there's a functional plasticity far more for water to be able to take on the shape and things and characteristics to be able to function for memory and things like that. And so when it's a 1.4 nanometers per a frequency like a 1.4 hertz, which will, the water all of a sudden it cleans itself. So a fish that's put into a little bit of life hydrate water, could then be released into a stream and it will clean the whole stream. A small amount of this water will cause the resonance of itself. It's the finest memory of the Earth and in the universe, which is of hydrogen. And it's 1.432 hertz, which is pure life hydrate water. And it's like really got a lot more hydrogen. It's got 3 hydrogen molecules to 1 oxygen molecule. It's positive. And then it's equally balanced with an oxygen and hydrogen north negative, you see. So to be equal, you've got an ordinization, which is a real resonant JC Quanta. And at a constant, really, like if you take a temperature like 25 degrees Celsius, for instance, which you've got pure water, I could give you an equation, which is a JC quantum equilibrium reaction. But in some book and something which people could be interested, we could talk a bit more about that. But basically, really, like what you've got hydrogen, more like this hydronium ions, which is gold hydrate, just like gold hydrate, and the oxygen, and you've got really a north negative charge, magneton. You've got a capacity where water is really to be able to cause a greater, softer membrane and cause more permeability of nutrient into the cell and things just like this in proper cell function, because otherwise it sort of really could be dried up a lot more. And you've got bitterness and sort of itchy skin and dry sort of psoriasis types of conditions, which is absolutely exacerbated by hypercapnia, which is really like mouth breathing rather than nose breathing through sleep, which you really should pay attention to these sorts of things. But it's a really provided protection against free radicals, of course, and on Jubb's cell rejuvenation, you've really got life hydrate coming in, which assists to cause all the blood platelets and things to be more unstuck. Otherwise, you've got a kilowatt, a JC quanta of a kilowatt, which is an equilibrium constant more for water, and where it has a measurement and it's got a high kilowatt, it has a greater power, it has a greater neededness to be able to have operated that as well. And so a hell of a lot more energy really is used in 1,000 watt than it is like, 0.1 or something. But so it's like a kilowatt of hour of work, and something which is functional, where water can be structured. It can have a power within it to get work done, and it's acting as an antioxidant, and it's the smallest antioxidant in the world. And now most antioxidants are huge. It's like a Queen Mary carrying something along, which it'll give to something, but where can that go through anything? No. Where this life hydrate does, it goes through everything, you see. And so it's probably it's the most powerful sort of antioxidant and things that's in the world. If we go back and we look just at the question, of course, about the oceans and sort of the rocks are really crying out to everybody. You've got in the Cretaceous era and in the Meso era, you saw like a paleogenic extinction goes on, and the crystals that's within ourselves, where the dawn is drawn more, it's really an alignment more to the Earth's magnetic field. And just like a compass needle, really, it lines up with the north negative pole. Everybody could really see where the rotation was, where the poles were in the past, of course, where the magnetic pole shifts were in showing the ages of time and orientation on the sea floor, where the magnetic magma got set, and how long and big a time that it took for those expansion joints to grow. I mean, those are things that you could really understand actually how the Earth has come to be where it is. And the the continents in relation to each other. But basically, that really only goes back 85,000 years ago when the oceans start to grow. And so you're only really looking at brand new oceans. It's only about 85,000 years old. And the moon really is roughly 432 million centimetres was, closer back then, 85,000 years ago. So could you imagine that? It's 432 million centimetres closer. So the moon has moved further away in that time. You've got 70 million years ago, if you think about it, it's a little bit. It's like interesting because you look at physics, you could really start to understand a little bit more about things, like the density of the sun only being, 0.7, the density of water, for instance. And 7% the density of water is what Saturn is, because it's mainly like a watery body, gaseous. And so 90 million years ago really ends major extinction with a major extinction event, and it's really a time span that you could look and see the duck-billed platypus wandering around everywhere and flying reptiles and this sort of thing. And you've got Chicxulub Club asteroid pretty much at a similar time, and following along with 66,000 years ago, roughly. What happens now really is, for our ancestors ever more known, and like the KT eliminated 80% most of all life, and such certain it did, it's asteroids and the things that went on back then. But carbon-14 shows, of course, which could be accurate if a little bit this data where a lot of other things is you can start to correlate things more, and that you could use, to look at life a little bit, but only can go back a little way. But it shows 22,000 years ago, 39,000 years ago, you've got different sorts of events which goes on in the data. And dinosaur bones, of course, have been found only that old. And so it's all of them, so a lot of things. So how come all of a sudden, you see, no, the data doesn't show that this is millions of years old. That's ridiculous. And no fossil evidence really of any evolution shows that evolution occurred. And no fossil ever fits with any category, of course. But if you don't really have anything in between, any transition, and that there is symbiosis and pleomorphism, which you could learn about, you could see how easy it is for all the species to arrive as they have, which in life colloid and colloidal boas and secrets of an alkaline body, people could start to learn a bit more about this, and Jubb's magnicity, which some of this stuff would release a little bit more. But it's no direct ancestor, of course, for man or dinosaur, and it really makes sense that dinosaurs really didn't live out at the same time. They sure did. They lived at the same time, in more recent times even, and rather than millions of years ago, only thousands. And dogs and cats and rabbits all lived where dinosaurs were. So you've got vertebrates and you've got the land, and invertebrates. Invertebrates, you've got to go only back 350,000 years ago. That's not millions. And so this really, the dating thing is a problem, because maybe we just have a moment to talk just a little bit about that, because it's completely not scientific, like we said. But the dating always was because something can't accept that any calamity occurred. Why? Well, because that accelerates all the decay rate radically. And can you accept that something would all of a sudden not be consistent in the model that exists? No. And so, see, this is very problematic. The Buccal asteroid, like we talked about, flooded over the northern area of the whole of Africa, and mountains caused mountains of tsunami, and the Gulf of Oman, and all of this gets funneled and swept across the Sahara, like we talked about. And a telltale sign of evidence, really, which in the original Trans-Saharan Sea used to be, and that would be in the middle of Africa, and it was the ports and things, and ocean. But 28,000 years ago, you've got core samples which show, there was massive sea flooding in there. And so various times you see the landscape has changed from what you're looking at. A catastrophic flood recent time, of course, also because of the rivers and things that's like this, explains how deposits come to be more in the Black Sea, for instance, and how that came to be salt within it, and it used to be rainwater, and now it's a build-up of stalagmite and stalactite in the caves, which if you go underground and you could see, when did this all occur? Like a massive increase suddenly in water precipitation. You could see all of those things. You can add it all up like a computer. You can start to actually be way more than some computer could be. But a massive increase in rainfall also is a really increase in solar flare activity and comets and this sort of thing. And expanding really the shorelines of the Black Sea. It's all real proof that there was an existence of Neolithic settlements more in the day, and factual, of absolute, inspected and all seen, significant. You've got wood from ancient villages all around the bottom where the Black Sea was, and there's no question that the flood did wipe out all of that, and that back then it was before the founding of Crete. And so you've got the more Kush Atlantean Empire going back, and suddenly starting to mine again big time in Canaan and Canada, which Canada is much older than Canaan, and the mining and all that sort of thing, and the ports and stuff are radical. So, but Atlantean and the Phoenicians, of course, that we're talking about, really settled, and they went right across the Silk Road, and they built all their buildings and things in style of this, which is obvious and can still be seen to this day. But settlements really go back in a very sophisticated way beyond Crete, and the definite the Mediterranean, and very large freshwater lakes, which was at the bottom of the Black Sea, which was today, of course. And you've got metallic sorts of objects which really show great sophistication, of course, 6,500 years ago. You've got really old European science, of course, that comes along, and more sea dimension and geometry. And then you've got 5 to 3, and you've got all this sort of advanced types of ways to get pi and extreme sophistication. And you've got, this didn't just come out of a vacuum, you see. You've really got evidence of a young Earth and knowledge migrating to begin again and disperse where knowledge is. And, of course, Canaan and Canada and the Greek and all the languages that's very similar, like there with the native originals in Canada. And when the flood came, of course, it had emptied the Mediterranean out back then, and it all rushed back in like a giant rapid sort of thing. Salt evaporates. In times before this, you could see decades before this, and all the water is evaporated and causes massive, big, huge salt deposits, which below the Mediterranean is one of the more older sea floor levels, like Lake Victoria is. Then soft tissue that's recovered from the thigh bone of T-Rex in Montana. You've got really, showing you in our mind, amongst some of the older sort of things which is going on, like the sea floor where we're talking about. It's only really not very old at all, and more in the thousands, not millions, like people think. And now that figures can fit perfectly to show you, of course, what went on and how did the South Pole come to be where it is. But tissue and blood and collagen really still and preserved, which is common, could be found inside fossils. And so how could that be if that was so old? It can't be. Of course, tissue in cells break down really quickly and couldn't ordinarily be older than maybe 4,000 years old, perhaps, But you'd wonder, wouldn't you? But if ages really are a bit of a disgrace on us, because you don't really can get the same age from the same lab ever, and all show a massive anomalies and things, and in sedimentary layering and this sort of thing. But if you go back, you could see certain that the Burkle crater flood did occur, and that was like 4,800 years ago, roughly. But the decay rates of zircon in granite, for instance, at dates and try to get the date of the Earth and things, shows very old zircon that's inherited and arbitrarily kind of escaped and not have anybody known of any start point, because there was no observational reference point for anybody to look to see what was inside something. And so a parent and a daughter could be present inside the first sample of something that began, because who would know? And so you can't can't take all that extrapolatedness and cause confounding variables to exist. It's not controlled, and say that you've really come up with a date or something which is just so off, it's unbelievable, it's so wrong, we should scrap it. Radioactivity really that would end up going to lead, for instance, but doesn't do that in any consistentness. An enormous diversity is the result of, and so if you've got 4 hourglasses and you've got all these different ways to actually create the time, like uranium, iridium, and potassium argon, and strontium and argon, and these sorts of decay rates and all sort of really are not consistent whatsoever. And so we're looking at flood geography and these sorts of things. There are so many things that you could describe and actually that you could point out and start to look at that actually start to date things more accurately. But carbon dating can often have been violated because you've got these three irrational sort of assumptions. Of course, potassium argon decay and the account of whatever it's known and the improvable all sorts of assumptions that could have existed. You've got soft tissue where dinosaurs are. You've got how could this be millions of years old? You've got 8 billion skeletons that are supposed to be of humans, apparent hominoids. If it was that we just sort of began about a million years, 185,000 years ago, and there might have been a million of us. It really would then end up as like apparently got 8 billion skeletons somewhere. Where is all that? But it's really unproven assumption, and that's really wrong. Tragedy really is a finite fallen assumption, of course, that's rejected, and that proper science as authority really should be, because otherwise you've really got a tragedy, haven't you? And how could we accept all this from Genesis and these sorts of things, where things, certainly in science, what apparently science is, that certainly doesn't add up. But the scientific method really could be unproven assumptions, and the carbon dating is reasonable up to only 50,000 years. Carbon-12 is consistent over many years, and it's a half-life certain too. But then carbon-14 does, and the ratio between the two has completely changed because we're burning a lot, and we're making more carbon-12 than we ever would have. Just natural, and so you've got a larger ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14. So these are things which is not really constant, and then in decay, and C12 has a series effect, like because the burned fossil fuels, and C12 and same in a different sort of ratio of or not any C14 in relationship, which would be ordinary and natural. But we've gotten changed those things. So rock tests of parent to know what the parent or daughter decay rate, which is something constant. How could you know? Because you wouldn't have been there to be able to point out what was in the beginning and how did something start. And so the time of decay that's present really isn't known, and no observation much is a reference point that exists. You've got a lot of confounding assumptions really. So no observational reference point, no daughter and parent atoms could ever be understood and looked at. No decay rate really could be very constant at all. And so because of these things, there's a lot of things which has been falsified. And shouldn't that be known? I mean, if you've got all these things sort of going on, of course, and shouldn't those sorts of things be questioned? Because otherwise you've got a real conspiracy of a bit of silence, and you've got certain it is true. You've got isotope decay and radiometric sorts of conditions, a scientific method of dating the Earth, which is completely off and make me sick. And like, how could it keep going on where somebody says, yeah, 4.5 bill, 4.5 bill? It's like, you want to just have a technicolor yawn because it's so bad. And but could somebody be a bit more logical? And the layering of the corresponding to 10,000 years that apparently is truly ridiculous. Let's just get rid of Darwin right now. That was really bad. And also Pasteur, they both lied like crazy, you know what I mean? And then something else was going on back then, influencing everything, a little bit the similar like today. You've got a clandestine picture, of course, where you're looking at seeing discoveredness of events, and even like on a wander and knowing that everything was connected. And you've got Aboriginal paintings all over the earth at the time in the same time frame. and suddenly all of a sudden, continents will get more moved apart. But fault movements could sink and also rise. You've got fresh water, and you've got slowly becoming salinated, and you've got fresh tissue inside dinosaur bones, which start to show up. It can't be 65 million years ago. You've got fossilized finger bones and this sort of thing that's found with dinosaur bones in the Paluxy River region and things similar. Agedness and so apparent. A fossil handprint also found in Glen Rose, and you've got the largest dragonfly flying back then, which has got a wingspan of about 30 inches, and it would weigh as much as sort of like a pound or more. Large bugs roamed around. You've got Earth grew in a disciplinary manner with no subduction, no plate shifting, no rotation, no tectonic plates. They really fit perfectly together. And it was a smaller planet. It's 12 times smaller than it is today. Absolutely perfect, and all over it all fits and it's nailed. And in recent time, you've got the duck-billed platypus that did roam everywhere. And you've got aboriginals ripping around too. And you've got the older sea floor at the bottom, and it's only about 125,000 more years old, and not old. Just the oldest dating of the sea floor really is showing us that the oceans are really fairly new, not old. So you've got this mega tsunami where the Burkle crater is, recently, of course, associated with all these water that's swarmed over the whole of Australia and other places too. You've got the deluge, which you could see right there. If you look from afar down at the Earth, you can see how that's affected America. The deluge vaporized massive amounts of water when it happened, and it coincides with, at least 155 different types of current cultural stories, doesn't it? You've got deep sea sands all placed over the lands, and you've got deep sea microflora all at the top of the mountains. You've got nothing that survived except for just bit. And you've got chevrons that show you how did that happen. So couldn't we just grow up and get on with everything? You've got a massive deposits all over the islands, and you've got impact of sphericals which are found. And so you've got singular events which went on, and it's all said that around 4,800 years ago you've got 180 metre high waves which originate more from points which you could see, and you can see where all this has come straight out of where the chevrons are, and go back from where this is, and you can go right back to the Burkle crater. And so old stories which really are around 5,000 years ago, because Noah's Ark, of course, and Noah's flood, and you've got a lot of this sort of really civility all of a sudden that happened, suddenly thrown out the window, and you've got a brutal type of an existedness of some smashed type of condition. But you've got water that just moves over India during the same time, and a huge tsunami which then deposits all the salt and things in the Himalayas. You've got comets which really are shown to break up into little pieces and things, and some of that sort of ends up in the Indian Ocean. And you've got around 2,807 BC, you've got this flood from the Burkle crater, and all died more or less, quite a bit. You've got ocean water that was volatilized, and winds that spread vapor all around the world, and you've got such severe magnetic storms going on where everything is sort of decimated. Got evidence of it. Got the dating of the Earth, which really could be seen that the sea floor expansion is where the tectonic plates are pushed apart from each other. And every event where an asteroid was, it boils and heats up the mantle suddenly, of course, and all becoming plastic, and continents start to get pushed apart by the water that's locked up in the Earth. And only less than 1% of all the water that exists is flowing at the moment. A bit more than 99% still in the Earth, locked up in the rock, but where you've got these huge events that go on, continents are pushed apart because water start to boil and things and start to heat, and they can expand 1,700% of what it is, which is normal. So ocean floors start to spread, and water comes out of the rocks, and this all starts around 85,000 years ago, more Lake Victoria and the Mediterranean and the hugging of the Pacific plate. You can see the oldest lakes more and bottom of the sea floors, and all of this is more like under the Mediterranean in a very old spot. And you've got these oceans are really fairly new, and the acceleration of time that subsides more where something is relative to each other today, where continents are left. But for instance, 15 million years ago, of course, only a short mile time, a massive spread was sudden, and you got 200 millimeters per year all of a sudden in one moment. And so you see, how could this occur if there wasn't actually some explanation for that? Because the density hasn't changed, but the expansion has occurred, and that expansion is massive. And now you're going to have 3/4 more gravity because we've moved the surface, a larger surface away from the centre. Simple, and we've increased the gravity as a result. So we had much less gravity back then. So of course, when you could really look at this, you could go back 15 million years, and you've got asteroids which are ripping through the Indian Ocean, skipping and ripping out just above Java and plunging back into the Pacific. You've got an age of progressiveness, where the older, seafloors are moved away more from the mid-ocean ridge expansion joint, and so you've got expansion joints, which is typical, which is about 0.7 centimeters or 0.04 of an inch per year, but suddenly it could go up to 17 centimetres, which is about 6.7 inches per year, and imagine the massive increase that's going on where that is. But how could it be so sudden all of a sudden, you see, if it wasn't that occurred? And you can also see that suddenly you've got a lot of water that comes out of the earth, and it's increasing the seafloor spread and causes more of the levels of the ocean to rise. And so this is the reason for all this, like what we're talking about. The climate changes are just making a pretty penny of a lot of stuff. But otherwise, bankers are not going to be interested in people investing in properties close to the coastline if all this is what's said is, oh, wow, guess what, you're going to be flooded out. It's like, wow, I mean, a lot of this is totally incorrect, utterly. I mean, we're going to be coming into an ice age soon, so what do you think? The poles are going to just freeze all of a sudden more? And when all the water went up there because of, drastic events that pushed all the water up there, and it just left it up there. And still, but thermal expansion and density, JC quanta is critical for water to be in a liquid state. And it's a very temperature dependent, of course, because at 42 degrees or 4 degrees Celsius or 42 degrees Fahrenheit, you've got the highest condition going on of a loading point, and above and below that, water expands, so it's not as dense. And so water has one of the highest melting points, of course, as an anomaly. You've got a very high critical point and surface tension bounce, and you've got viscosity and heat in its vaporization, which is really some very anomalous types of conditions if you think about it. But it's expanding and going beyond its critical state where things are and held and locked up in the water. It can become suddenly much less dense, and of course, when it's in expanded state, it's extremely got interesting properties and far more level of different sorts of properties that exist. For instance, when you look into water that's inside a crystal, and it's got different properties. It can't freeze, for instance. It really can expand up to 9% or more of its volume, where water is general, and mass weight could have is unchanged, of course, but 1 degree Celsius, you've got a 0.00021 sort of water increase in its volume, and that steam, of course, it could be 1,700 times more expanded. Yes? And so now you can see the reason why the Earth is expanded like it has. So the dating of the Earth really could be seen more from the seafloor expansion, like we're talking about, where the tectonic plates more are pushed apart from each other. You can see the events where asteroid impact really boiled and heated up the mantle, and suddenly all being more plastic, the continents all more pushed apart. You've got, because of the water which was locked up in the Earth, and suddenly all of a sudden that's just released more. And this is what you see going on and flowing more, where the oceans have come to be more. And so you've got an Earth that's 12 times larger than it really was, and this explains it. This jumps, not a theory, but a grand unified totality of the way the Earth grew. Its gut. It's a grand unified totality. It's not a theory. Of course, the ocean floor spread only starts around, some small time ago. This is not a long time ago at all. You've got Lake Victoria, you've got the Mediterranean, you've got the hugging of the Pacific Plate. And as we said, look, there's massive problems with dating rocks. Jesus, I mean, it's a shocker, okay? There's no consistency, so we've got to drop it. You've got to come up with a better way to go looking at things. And you can't keep going on with this 10,000 year stuff and your layering thing to come up with all these old dates, which how the hell can you go back? You can't. There's just too much of a gap in everything, and it's purposeful, honest, but not right. It's just like most people don't even know how blood is formed. But also under the Mediterranean, you can really see a great olderness and a divided sort of a floor and the spread of where things are and the patterns of time and things, of how accumulation of material that's existing there comes to be, and you can explain how that happened. Very good. Because now you're like looking at an hourglass, you're learning a little bit more how to read everything. But if it's in an instance more of some thousands or millions of years ago, you've got certain that at 15 million years ago more, you've suddenly all of a sudden got a massive spread. And it's over 200 millimetres or more a year. And so you've got something that all of a sudden gets kicked off, don't you? You see? And so you've got things which definitely show a younger Earth in the thousands of years old, not millions even. And it's just the age is grotesquely sort of not correct, and that the older that you go on, where something is, where age is, you could see that it's certain that the older parts of the are much older than the mid-ocean section, where the ridge is expanding, where the joint is, you see. And so the oldest parts are at the closest to where the continents are, and that is where you're finding the old seafloor. So as you can see that the seafloor is only pushed apart by 5 miles of basalt, and the rest of the continent's like up to 37 miles or so of something thick. And so you can see how the Earth has expanded because you've got that 5 mile, more or less, of basalt pushing the continents apart, and vaporizedness of water and all sorts of things causing an equilibrium relative to the turgor that's existed. And as the Earth spins, it pushes out more at the equator and brings and subducts more at the poles. And when the Earth sort of changed its north-south, always it also changed, of course, the equator too. And these things all can be seen so perfectly honest in the way that north-south has crystallized in the magma. If you can learn how to read these things, you come up with something which is close to what I can see from what I've done in my investigation of reading the tissue in some of the topics which we've just talked about. Anyway, mate, I hope you're having a really wonderful day as you get this, and I really feel like maybe there's a question or two.
Rick from Chicago was asking about the osmolytic enzymes. I think it was.
Okay. Osmolytic enzyme, an enzyme, of course, has to remain relative in its osmolytic state because it can't have been congealed or coagulated or become resistant because it has to be still functional, and then most of these things don't remain functional They're no longer in an enzymatic state at all. So everything which is enzymatic, meaning that it's still in its got an orthophilic state, lots of things are not. And so where are you going to get those enzymes from to help break things down? But it's typical that this is sort of a law of adaptive secretion of digestive enzyme. And if you bring some enzyme in with food, it's going to help. It's going to help to digest that food. If you don't do that, you're always robbing something from the body, aren't you? And so you're eventually ending up with pancreatic deficiency. But if you could think that that's gone on where somebody is genetic and things, would you absolutely need actually more enzymes to come into the body to help where this is? And where should they come from? Should they be really good enzymes or cold processed and this sort of thing, or should it be mixed up with a lot of plant protein and all sorts of things which is glassified and really sort of a bit more excitotoxic and stuff? But we're on track a little bit when you're kind of thinking about enzymes. You're thinking about more osmolytic element. And that enzymes are so important, especially like a pathway that actually involves this sulfur dioxygenase pathway, which is one of the more powerful pathways. If you're thinking about it computing and you're thinking about actually looking at all the evidence, everything on the earth, and you're just coming up with what the most powerful sort of antioxidants of this sort of thing is, you're going to come up with this sulfur dioxygenase pathway, yeah? And get on with it when you can, because you're going to give things a rating, and now you've got substance which can help detox people from nervine and this sort of thing. And the reason why some of these substances, like $44,000 a kilo of honey, the reason is because you can absolutely got substances in that can help turn people's conditions around, so it can be poisoned and things, you see, yeah? Because it's got such powerful enzymes in it. Can you heal yourself up without this pathway? No, absolutely not. Number one condition of the massive concentration of element that we have in our product, which I, cold process and handcraft, basically. Yeah. There's no more concentration of these things, really, on the earth. But that's what another question is, mate.
This one's kind of personal. Schizophrenia?
Yeah, it really is a big difference between, and so solid a connectedness that an ordinary person, some kind, could have some schizophrenic sorts of behaviours a bit, but not be schizophrenic because there's not something which continues on past the point where some disturbedness is where thought is, and logic and things isn't quite as easy able to be put per se. And that a condition exists where the amygdala and tegmentum complex, which is involving aversion, inhibition, and dissociation, a more internal processedness of the loo, is far larger and more operating than the septal region of the brain, which is involved more in pleasure and interest, which connects you to your frontal cortex. So your frontal cortex really causes you to have the ease of ability to have a faculty to inspire creative influence of the future, and the motor sequencing of behaviour and this sort of thing, and more an alpha gating reflex in this. And so you've really got right and left hemisphere crossed over sort of thing going on, where you've got more frontal cortex activity, and you only get into that if you've got pleasure and interest. But what would happen if you just grew up and you really had just a lot of dearth and everything was I don't want, can't, should, try, but must only, and very adverse, and you grew your amygdala system so big, and the tegmentum, and every time anything ever goes on, you're tripped up so quick and fast. I mean, most of these people are sweating by their hands, they're cold, they're clammy, they don't have really much energy, they daydream a lot, they can't be too functional in life, they polarize very, very quick, they get set off, and afterward they can't collect themselves. It's like all of a sudden sort of something happened. It's like they're packing themselves up and they've headed off or something, and they can't connect with anyone. It's like they're doing things and they're not really connecting with someone, you see? And these things are very, very troublesome for someone behaviourally where they are, because they always, a pancreatic function is not known that they have cystic fibrosis. And this cystic fibrosis causing dark circles around their eyes, causing their skin to be dry, causing their hair to fall out, causing them to have sort of more deer-eyed types of condition where their eyes are sort of bulge slightly a little more. And causing dry skin, causing cold hands, and causing sleep disturbance, causing sleep onset latency disturbance, and not thriving, and having a lot of don't want, can't, should, try, but must only, and having fear way more than you should, and doing a lot of mind reading, thinking people thought something, which how could you think that? This is ridiculous. There's too many things that's a violation, that the pancreas has primarily got lesions, and there's intestinal lesions, and those things can cause someone not to have minded the gut, so they could gut the mind. When you gut the mind, you've minded the gut, but how can you mind the gut? If you don't mind the gut, you can't gut the mind, because minding the gut is making sure that you have a serotonin dopamine axis good, and most people's serotonin dopamine axis is really off because they're not making proper neurotransmitters. And so it's sort of really not recognised. But behavioural things you can see, these are people who have control issues big, and they've never really learned how to motivate people. And so they're so stuck in the control issue one, like they will dissociate, walk off, they'll pack themselves up and take off, and they just really can withdraw all their service so fast and quick. You'll see this often. You'll see them turned on and then all of a sudden turned off. And so they'll think that other people are turned off and suddenly turned off. And this is ridiculous. This can't be existed. But this is sort of like the world that somebody sees, and that's their world. And their world internal is the same as the world outside. And how bad is that? The world inside doesn't match what is on the outside proper for them to actually achieve anything. And so most of it is they cannot turn the internal dialogue off, and they're doing all these other types of things to practice austerity or who's to know something, which is truly disastrous, because the thing that you'll be doing is actually feeling pleasantry and bliss from having turned their mind off and being able to function ever more proper. So little known is it that the pancreas, coming full circle more, is so important, and cystic fibrosis, somebody should look more into this. Jub cell rejuvenation helps heal this up. And so might you look a little bit more by going to jubdavid.com and having a little bit of a look into Jub cell rejuvenation. And if we know our past, it's pretty spiritual, isn't it? Because we could know more where we're going, isn't it? Yes? Yes, we can. And we must know that, because you've got this referential index, haven't you? And now you can be more scientific about what you're saying and doing. And you can be more qualitative in how you go about doing things, which most scientists have never studied qualitative research. They don't even know what validity is or reliability. They can't define any of these things, so that's pretty bad, you know what I mean? But it's okay too. I mean, we should just learn how to wake up, really, all of us. Yeah. Anything else, mate?
Thank you for you've been going over some of this stuff with me for years. I appreciate you going back over it for me.
Yeah, exactly, mate. How amazing. Got a good show. Got in a nutshell some few things which are a bit paradigm busting. But stay tuned for the next show. We've got some really great stuff and positive, sure. Good questions today. Let's keep going with some of this stuff here. Anyway, maybe some bit more shows that relate to this, eh? And things that relate to it, anyway. Administrative councils can form all over the earth, which they should, and we could be forming policy versus policy being formed to cause us to be just dumbed down and stuff. Anyway, mate, hope you're having a really great day to get this, and we'll catch up to each other in a future show, mate, yeah? Love you, mate.
Love you
and
too.
love to our audience. Love you, mate. Goodbye.